let's start by talking about the Pope. So Pope Francis died this week at 88, and there's so much to say about the Pope, but I wanted to start off by sharing one Christian evangelist's condolences to the Pope. And let me try to tell you what he was, let me tell you what he was trying to do. The guy's name is Matt Powell. He's one of these extremely right-wing creationists. And he was like, the Pope died? Well, I'm going to use that to tell everybody that they should stop being Catholic and they should become the right kind of Christian, which is whatever type of Christian he is, which is non-denominational, evangelical, creationist. So it was a 5-minute video where he made that pitch. But along the way, he's like, I got to get on their good side first so they'll listen to me. So he wanted to offer condolences to people whose hearts may be broken by the death of Pope Francis. And he wanted to give a shout out and his sympathies to a specific group of people. And it made me laugh. Let me play you a short clip here.
So I recently heard about the death of Pope Francis. And a lot of Catholics are mourning right now. And to Pope Francis's family, I do want to give you condolences on behalf of the Christians that feel bad for you personally for having lost somebody that you do love and care for.
He gave condolences to the family of Pope Francis. I guess to Pope Francis's wife and kids? Yeah, okay. Anyway, that one just made me laugh. Like, who wants to tell him? But anyway, I was talking about Pope Francis earlier today with my podcast co-host. I don't think I did a good job of explaining my feelings about Pope Francis, and you could hear that in the podcast. So I'm going to try it again, round 2 tonight, to try to tell you what's bugging me about the coverage of Pope Francis. And part of the thing that kind of annoyed me is the hagiographies that are going out about him, because people are like, this is the greatest man who ever lived, and he was wonderful, and oh no, he's gone now. And specifically, one of the things they mentioned, this is one example of it. Let me see if I can get a better version. There we go. Like, oh, Pope Francis, he's the people's Pope. He's not one of those people who lives in this palace. He took the humble route, and, he was a man of the people. Very nice. Here's another thing shared. I mean, I know Barack Obama has to say something nice about him, but this is what Obama said. He remembered Pope Francis as a rare leader who made us want to be better people, which, not exactly true. But again, I get why the former president would have to say something nice like that. This is another headline. This is from NBC News. Pope Francis leaves a legacy as a Catholic Church reformer. And look at that subtitle there. The leader of the world's 1 billion Roman Catholics addressed past scandals and embraced migrants, the poor, and gay and lesbian faithful. Some wish he had gone further. Okay, they're saying a lot there without getting extremely specific in the article. But this is what bugged me. Like, they act like he was a real ally to LGBTQ people. They act like he really elevated women in the church, things like that. And no, that's not really true. And this is what I had a hard time explaining earlier today during the podcast, which is, I get that he made some incremental moves in a more tolerant, inclusive direction. But by and large, I think he did more with his style rhetorically than he actually did on paper. And the thing is, with any president, with any world leader, with a religious leader, what you do on paper, to me, matters a lot more, because that's what's going to stay long after you are gone. And in that sense, Pope Francis really didn't do that much for LGBTQ people, for women, etc. And I want to talk about some of these issues because he's getting more credit than I think he deserves. I mean, again, you can give him a little bit of credit, but he's getting way too much for all the wrong reasons. And this is what's bugging me so much. Like, the Catholic Church is really hard to change because it has centuries of dogma piled up, hardened. Even if you're the Pope, you don't get to magically change that in an instant. And if you push to make it slightly less awful, that's nice. But let's all admit then that you just made a teeny tiny little change. It wasn't anything big. And before I get into the specifics, what I keep thinking about is George W. Bush, because he was president when I was old enough to understand a little more about what was going on. You know what I mean? Like, I was cognizant during the presidency of George W. Bush. And what I can tell you as an old person who remembers that presidency is that George W. Bush was awful in pretty much every sense of the word. He didn't do all the crazy shit we're seeing right now from this administration, but he was bad on policy. He surrounded himself with ideologues. He appointed really horrible people to the Supreme Court, things like that. If you were around during his presidency and you were a liberal, you knew that George W. Bush could do no right. You know, whether it was stem cell research, the war in Iraq, things like that. He was a historically awful president, and we're still feeling the repercussions of many of the things he did, specifically on the Supreme Court. But given that Donald Trump is president today, I think a lot of people wrongly look fondly upon George W. Bush as like a silly, goofy uncle of sorts. Like, anytime he shows up at one of those events where a lot of former presidents show up, people treat George W. Bush like this cute, adorable old man who likes to paint, and he doesn't really get involved in politics anymore and things like that. There were billboards during the Trump administration, or like during the 2020 elections, with George W. Bush's face, and they say things like, "Miss me yet?" Like, no, I do not miss you. And if you think, sure, he was conservative, but he was a decent guy, no, he wasn't. And that's the thing that bugs me. How many people seem to imply George W. Bush was conservative, but he was good. He was fundamentally at heart a good person. No, he wasn't. And that's what I get the feeling people are thinking about Pope Francis. Like, okay, the Catholic Church may be a bad institution, but at least he was a good guy at the helm. No, he wasn't. Let's get specific here. Here's where I think he did a good job. When he talked about migrants, immigrants, refugees, he did a nice job of saying, we got to be merciful with them. We got to treat them with kindness and respect. He did the same thing with environmentalism. You know, the Catholic Church is not anti-science the way like fundamentalists or evangelicals are, but he pushed for accepting climate change and taking steps to mitigate that. That is all good. Let's talk about where he was not a champion. What about, sexual abuse in the Catholic Church? Here's an article from NPR. This is from 2018, but check this out. This is after a bishop was accused of abuse. Last week, the Pope accused victims of sexual abuse in Chile of slander, saying their attacks on this bishop amount to calumny because there is not a shred of evidence against him. The day they bring me proof against this bishop, I will speak. Implying that if you don't have concrete evidence this bishop did something to you, shut your damn mouths. And he kind of apologized for that, as you could see in the next paragraph. And he's like, yeah, what I said was a slap in the face to them. I didn't mean it like that. But this is kind of the way he handled sexual abuse. He dismissed it if he didn't think it was warranted. There was an obituary in the New York Times. This is, I think, a fair analysis. He adopted new rules to hold top religious leaders, including bishops, accountable if they committed sexual abuse or covered it up, though he didn't impose the level of transparency or civil reporting obligations that many advocates demanded. So, okay, you have some new rules, but if you're asking people outside the Catholic Church, what do we need to do with these people who have been accused? Pope Francis got in the way of that. Just to give you one example, last week, I think I talked about what happens if someone confesses abuse in confession booths and a priest hears it. Should that priest have to report it? The Catholic Church's stance is, no, if they heard it in confession, it stays a secret forever. Even if by telling a law enforcement official about it, we can stop a child from getting attacked. We still got to keep it a secret, says the Catholic Church. The reason that is changing in the state of Washington, specifically in this case, is because secular authorities said, we do not think priests should get a pass for keeping quiet about abuse. We don't give a damn where they heard it. Make them mandatory reporters. The Pope could have said, yeah, we take this stuff seriously, so I agree. It doesn't matter where you heard about the abuse, you still got to report it. Of course, the Pope didn't do that because he had to enforce the dogma that says the act of confession is more important than a child getting molested. That is disturbing to me. What about women? What has he done about women? This is a headline in America Magazine, which is a Catholic magazine, how Pope Francis changed the place of women in the church. It's like, really? Did he? Are women better off because he was there? Well, here's what we know. This is from that same article. There is an increase in the proportion of women who work in the Vatican. Check this out. It went from 17% of people working for the Vatican in 2010. By 2019, it was at 24%. And there was an acceleration in the appointments of women to medium high positions like undersecretary because they went from 3 to 8. There are 1 billion Catholics in the world, but 5 women got some promotions at the Vatican. Yay, ladies. But here's the thing. In all the areas that the Catholic Church actually cares about, priests, bishops, anything higher than that, they are still forbidden. You cannot be a woman and actually be in charge. And if you look at the second paragraph, even in the positions where you can be a woman and hold certain positions in the church, guess what? The Vatican, by and large, still will not give you those jobs. Women remain a minority of employees in the Vatican, and even more so in its leadership. The vast majority, more than 80% of undersecretary and equivalent roles are held by men, primarily clerics, and women's representation shrinks further at the level of secretary and prefect. So again, what has he done for women? He might say, I'll give you a little raise, like at the very bottom of the totem pole of the Catholic Church, and you should, and what? It's not that the Pope was asking for praise, but I feel like people are saying he's been a huge benefit to women in the church. That is just not true unless you think going from like 0 to 1 at the bottom of this chain counts as some huge advancement. Again, if you're a woman and you want to be a priest, sorry, you're out of luck. Catholic Church, including Pope Francis, still says no. What about Ukraine? This one actually surprised me because I totally forgot this happened. What did the Pope say about Ukraine? You might think the Pope said, well, of course, Russia is the aggressor. They need to stop. Whatever, platform I have as the Pope, I'm going to use to condemn Vladimir Putin. That makes sense to me. That is not what this Pope did. This is an article from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. But check this out. Encouraging negotiations to end Russia's war on Ukraine, Pope Francis called for the two sides, the warring sides, to have the courage of the white flag. So he wants them to surrender. Asked whether Ukraine should surrender, and if doing so would legitimize the actions of Russia, the Pope said, well, the strongest one is the one who looks at the situation, thinks about the people, and has the courage of the white flag and negotiates. He is basically implying that Vladimir Zelensky should just say, okay, we'll stop fighting and Russia can have whatever parts of the Ukraine you want. Whatever you've taken over, it's yours. Like, no, that is not how it works. That's not how it should work. And it's horrifying that the Pope is like, just give Russia whatever they want. That's Donald Trump's position on this thing. What the hell? What about the US elections? You might think Pope Francis would say, listen, I'm not trying to tell you all how to vote. Who am I to say that? However, there is one clear candidate that is better in the 2024 election. Is that what he said? Of course, that is not what he said. He falsely claimed both parties were the same because Trump deep down and Kamala Harris openly were against life because Kamala Harris spoke about abortion rights. And Trump, I guess, didn't go far enough. And the Pope said, just choose the lesser of two evils. But by not specifying that, you're basically giving conservative Catholics permission to say, well, Kamala Harris supports abortion rights for everybody. That is the bigger evil, so I will vote for Donald Trump. So thanks, Pope. That didn't help. By the way, what Trump is doing right now will probably lead to the unnecessary deaths of millions of people through famine, through revoking aid overseas, through the measles that he's spreading. And by the way, yeah, abortion rates are also going to rise under Trump. So thanks for that. What about abortion? Let me tell you what Pope Francis said about abortion. I think this one has been forgotten since that time. Check this out. Pope Francis says abortion, even of a sick fetus, is like hiring a hitman. That's from 2018. The Pope said people who have abortions are like hitmen. I don't even know where to start with that. He also called the procedure itself, quote, an extremely dangerous crisis of the moral sense. He condemned violence against women in general, which, thanks, that's the least you can do. But also, if you're forcing women to give birth against their will, I would consider that a form of violence against women. Maybe. But the thing that really bugged me is when they said this guy was really good for LGBTQ issues. I mean, obviously, he's not an ally. Obviously, he didn't go as far as, you would hope the Catholic Church could go. But he very specifically was not good for LGBTQ people. And every time there was a headline about something he did that sounded like it could be good, there was always the fine print that you have to look at along the way. Okay? Now, the reason he gets so much credit and praise is because early on, like the first couple months of his papacy, he was asked about discrimination against gays and lesbians going on. And this is what he said at the time. And you've seen different translations of this, I know. If a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge him? And everyone was like, who am I to judge? Wow, the Pope is saying, yeah, who am I to cast judgment upon you? Like, well, first of all, he's the Pope. His job is literally casting judgment. So that's a little weird. But this is the thing you got to remember about this Pope. The Pope says everyone can be blessed by the church. I don't care who you are. I'm never going to deny you communion because you do something or believe something that I don't think fits with the Catholic Church. I'm always going to say there is a place for you in the Catholic Church. That's what his message of inclusion was. And that's nice. I mean, I'm sure the Catholic Church is like, yeah, we'll take anyone we can get. So there's no barrier for entry at this point. And that's kind of what the Pope was saying. Who am I to judge? I'm not going to be mad at you if you're gay. However, there are many rules in place when it comes to gay people. But when he said that, and I'm amazed that for the past 10 years plus, that quotation, who am I to judge, has been symbolic of the Pope being open and tolerant of LGBTQ people. But this is maybe the biggest example of this. Check this out. The LGBTQ magazine, The Advocate, that year, 2013, they named Pope Francis their person of the year with a Photoshop like no hate tattoo with the quotation, if someone is gay and seeks the Lord, who am I to judge? They named him their person of the year. This dude is not an ally. What the heck? I mean, that did not age well, but that also didn't age well in the moment. And I want to give you examples of how the Pope has not really been good for LGBTQ people. So the Pope has said in countries that criminalize same-sex actions, because there are countries in like Africa where if they catch you having sex with someone of the same sex, you could be arrested. You could be imprisoned for that. And the Pope said, that's wrong. Great. Thank you. But you know what else he said about gay people? He said kids are better off with heterosexual parents because the last thing we want would be gay parents to have children. Pope Francis, and this is from 2015, he stressed the importance of children having heterosexual parents. Heterosexual marriages not only ensured couples' happiness, you can't be happy when you're gay. What are you talking about? The Pope said, but were deemed essential for good parenting. Gay people, the Pope said, implied, cannot be good parents. That's what this Pope said about gay couples who are raising families. Now, there's another thing he got a lot of press for. He said priests were allowed to bless same-sex couples. And that's a different thing, because usually it's like, you know how sometimes priests say, oh, I'm going to give you communion if you are part of the church. And then, Nancy Pelosi steps up to receive communion and they're like, yeah, you support abortion rights, so no communion for you. And they did that to Joe Biden sometimes as well. And the Pope said, I don't care if they're in a gay marriage. Doesn't bother, it's not the issue. They can still be blessed. And people thought, wow, this is a big step in the right direction. However, check out this. This is the headline from the New York Times when this happened. What's the date on this? This is 2023. Pope Francis allows priests to bless same-sex couples. Wow. And then you read some of this fine print. Look at this. The new rule made clear that a blessing of a same-sex couple was not the same as a marriage sacrament. We are not saying they're married. It also stressed it's not blessing the relationship. We don't actually want you two to be together. And that to avoid confusion, blessings should definitely not be given around a civil or same-sex union or when anything suggests there's a wedding going on. So if two gay dudes show up to church, a priest can bless them, but basically, remember, you're just blessing two individuals who are sinners, and we are not acknowledging there's anything happening between these two people. Again, this goes back to the belief that Pope Francis has, which is that anyone can be blessed because we are always trying to increase our body count in the Catholic Church. But also, that is not any sort of praise, any sort of acceptance of gay couples. So even in that case, he's not doing anything different from blessing two guys who happen to be in line together, one after the other. What about priesthood? Could gay men be priests? I mean, we already know the answer is yes, because there have always been gay men who are priests. And usually the thinking is, well, you can be a priest if you're gay, you just got to be celibate. And that's also what they say to people who are not priests. Like if you are a Catholic and you are gay, the Catholic Church's dogma and their doctrine says, okay, fine, you're gay. However, don't you dare act on it. That's the Catholic Church's belief. And recently, very, very recently, like literally the beginning of this calendar year, the Vatican approved new rules that said you cannot say no to someone applying to become a priest just because they're gay. And everyone thought that was a big deal. Wow, they're accepting openly gay priests or openly gay people into the priesthood. And that sounds like a step in the right direction. But again, what did the Pope actually say here? What did the Vatican actually say here? According to the rules, the guidelines say that seminary directors should consider sexual orientation as only one aspect of a candidate's personality. To put that another way, the Catholic Church very much still opposes gay people doing anything that's gay. But if you're gay, they said, don't use that as an automatic reason to say, no, you can't be a priest. Just count that the same as drinking. Or like, oh, they have a criminal record. We'll take that into account, but we're not sure yet. Like, it counts as a strike against you, but maybe we're going to look at the other things as well. I don't know. That doesn't sound like a step in like a better direction to say that, okay, being gay is a bad thing, but you know what? We all do bad things. So let's just look at the rest of your resume. I don't know that that's a huge step in favor of LGBTQ people. And then this is from last year. I don't know if you saw this news. Pope Francis used an offensive slur for gay men in a closed-door discussion with Italian bishops last week, according to two sources. He used an Italian slur that basically amounts to calling a gay person the F word. Like, that's what this Pope did. That's just how he talks behind closed doors with his buddies about gay people. I don't know. I don't feel like I heard a lot of that mention during the obituaries and remembrances this week. I actually like how Frank Bruni of the New York Times put it at the very end of an article all about him, where, look at what he said here. Pope Francis was a man of the church and of his generation, steeped in the bigotries of both. He gave me and many other gay people hope, and then he reminded us of why we never look to his church for our dignity. Like, yeah, you can say that Pope Francis was okay for gay people. Like, he didn't treat being gay as a sin that was worse than other sins, which is kind of like what white evangelicals do. But he definitely still saw it as a sin. And the Catholic Church and what the Catechism of the Catholic Church says about gay people in same-sex relationships, or gay people who have sex with people of the same gender, and what they say about trans people, like, it is still more bigoted than anything you will find on J.K. Rowling's Twitter feed. Speaking of which, what has the Pope said about trans people? Because this one gets even worse. So this is back in 2024. The Vatican released a document about trans people. And again, the Pope signed off on this. This is his position as much as anything else. And what did it say? A transgender identity, the document asserts, seeks to annihilate the concept of nature. The existence of trans people, says the Pope, you are destroying nature. That's where they were at. And actually, he approved this document that was called Infinite Dignity, in which the church said anyone who subscribes to gender theory is making a personal self-determination, which is fancy words for if you're trans, you made a choice one day to be a different gender than you actually are, which is not how that works. And you would know that if you actually talk to any trans people. That document that, again, the Pope signed off on, also said that sexual difference, the difference between men and women, is the greatest possible difference that exists between living beings. And that's not true, and it denies any sort of gender spectrum. He also said that gender-affirming surgery threatens someone's unique dignity, which is not true, and I would argue has it completely backwards, because those surgeries affirm who you are and affirm your dignity. By his logic, getting LASIK or having an appendectomy, that's also a violation of God's perfect design, because you're altering what God gave you. What else did Francis say about trans people? He said, he actually got credit for this one a lot. He said trans people can be baptized. If you are trans and you go to the Catholic Church and you say, I want to give myself over to God, you can be dunked in the water. Okay, but again, this goes back to the Pope Francis belief that the Catholic Church will always try to increase their body count. They're not affirming who you are. They're not saying being trans is okay. They're saying, we found something with a pulse that wants to be a member of our club. Fine, take their dues immediately. Dunk them in the water, put them on the rolls. We got one. That's the value to them of trans people who want to get baptized. They're not doing it because they're okay with you being trans. So you get the idea. Like, again, I'm not saying he was vindictive. I'm not even saying the Pope was malicious. But the Pope reflected the Catholic doctrine and dogma, and that stuff is awful to LGBTQ people, to women, to victims of sexual abuse. And by and large, the Pope did not change things for the better, even though he got a lot of praise because he was really good at getting people to like him. All right. I also want to point out one other thing, and this is like the atheist side of me. I saw so many people referencing something the Pope did years ago in 2018. And here's the story. I'm going to show you this New York Post headline first, because this is just one version of what I saw everywhere. Tear-jerking moment. Pope Francis consoles boy who asked if his dead atheist dad was in heaven. And it resurfaced after Pope Francis died. And here's basically the story of what happened here. In 2018, the Pope was in a very poor part of Rome. And he was comforting, he was talking to an audience. A lot of kids were in the audience, and he was given a little lecture there. And at some point, he was taking questions from the audience. And this kid had a question. And when the microphone was in his face, the kid really couldn't spit it out. He was sad. And the Pope said, okay, I'm paraphrasing this whole thing. It's a long video and it's in another language. So I'm just going to try to paraphrase. The Pope says, come up here. Tell me what's wrong. Tell me your question. And you could see the kid whispering in the Pope's ear. And the kid is very sad. And afterwards, the Pope sends the kid back to his seat. And he says, with the kid's permission, I'm going to tell you what he asked me. And the kid said, his father recently died. Horrible, traumatic. And his father was a decent guy. He and his siblings were all baptized in the Catholic Church, but his dad was an atheist. And the kid wanted to know, is my dad in heaven? Which, okay, my heart goes out to that child. That's awful. That you have to think that. And the Pope's response was what he was trying to comfort this little boy, but also the Pope is still Catholic. And what the Pope basically said is, this sounds like a good guy. This is a good guy because only a good person, if you're a Catholic believer and you baptized your kids, well, guess what? That's what you're supposed to do. But if you're not a believer and you baptized your kids, that's got to be much harder. So, wow, props to your dad. He was a really good guy. And then the Pope asked the audience of children, does God abandon his children when they are good? And the audience of kids screams out, no. And the Pope says, there you go, kid. That's your answer. God does not abandon kids, does not abandon people who are good. So I'm sure your father's doing okay in the afterlife. And that is why he got praised. It's like, wow, he really comforted this child. Granted, we did not see interviews with the child after this to find that out. But here's the problem with what the Pope said. There is an implication that the father's life was not valuable to God on its own. The only reason the Catholic God was cool with this guy is because he baptized his kids. Why did he baptize his kids? I don't know. Maybe his mother-in-law was like, you better baptize my grandkids. Maybe his wife said the exact same thing. I don't know why he baptized my kids, but I'll tell you what, I'm an atheist and my kids sometimes go to a temple. Why? It's not because I'm pushing for it. You know what I mean? Sometimes you got to keep the peace. But that's the only reason this kid's dad was good? Are you kidding me? That's a horrible answer. Have you ever, as an atheist, heard a Christian apologist try to butter you up when they're trying to say, this atheist asks a very good question and I'm going to answer it. And guess what? Me and this atheist, we have actually a lot in common because I also do not believe there is a God with a white beard who sits on a cloud. So we both don't believe in that God. And then they go into their spiel and it's so condescending because it's like, dude, we don't believe in that either. We're talking about a deity who answers your prayers. That's the one we don't believe in. But that's what I got from this Pope. It was like a very weird answer that if you look at it without thinking about Catholic dogma, that's kind of a shitty answer. And also, why do you think the kid was so sad in the first place? Why did he think there was a chance his dad might be burning in hell despite being a good guy? That's because he was raised as a Catholic. And the church scared him into thinking that his amazing dad, who died so young, might be punished for eternity because of whatever, because he had thoughts, because he, challenged the notion of God. That's a bad look for the church. So I don't know. That answer is not great. We should be furious at the people who lied to that boy about hell, not praising the guy who swears the boy's father avoided it because he let his kids get dunked in water. All right. So I don't know. I'm not saying the Pope was evil. I'm just saying he doesn't deserve all the praise he's getting. Now, one thing to think about. I have heard some people say, well, the next Pope is going to be like super conservative because you can only go down from here, right? And the truth is, this Pope, according to Religion News Service, there are 135 cardinals who will vote for the next Pope. You need 2/3 of the vote. Well, Pope Francis installed, he handpicked 108 of the 135 cardinals, which means the Pope handpicked a supermajority of his people. to succeed him. They're the ones that are going to vote. So odds are, if he handpicked you to be a cardinal, you probably are aligned with Pope Francis in the first place. So the odds that his handpicked people are going to choose someone who's going to move the church in a ridiculously conservative place, that doesn't seem very likely. Now, you could also wonder, maybe they're going to ignore that. Maybe it's not about presenting the church as a tolerant, inclusive place, which isn't happening, but they like the image. Maybe they're thinking strategically, Catholicism isn't really growing in the United States, but man, is it growing in Africa. And in Africa, they really don't like LGBTQ people. But screw it. Let's elect the next pope from Africa in the hopes that we can do more outreach there. And then maybe they don't care. Because again, Pope Francis's legacy is that he doesn't care about LGBTQ people anything more than these are people who might count as bodies in the pews. They can be butts in our seats. That's what they're good for. But beyond that, he doesn't want to do anything for them. And the Catholic Church doesn't either. So we'll see. The next pope isn't going to change Catholic doctrine in any meaningful way. And the best that Pope Francis did, really, is he upset some of the traditionalists because he didn't really go all in on, he wasn't trying to go out of his way to be an asshole to people. But if you look on paper at what he did, by and large, that is kind of what his policies were. Still, predictably so. Okay, I hope that made sense. What questions do we have here? That's my little Pope rant. I think he was not as bad as your average Pope, but that's very far from an endorsement. I agree with that. And I think the thing I wish more coverage would explain is, in what way was he not as bad as the average Pope? Because I think the average Pope would have done a lot of the same policies, because I don't really think Pope Francis made a dent in these things that really needed to change. So how was he less worse than like Pope Benedict? He came off like a happy grandpa rather than a stern old disciplinarian. And I think people like the guy who smiles on camera. I mean, that's where he wasn't as bad. He looked better on camera. He sounded like a guy who exuded some empathy. If you look at his biography, coming from a middle-class family, working to alleviate poverty, that is wonderful. He's not coming from the ivory towers. He's not coming from a place where he's wanted to be pope since he was a fetus. He's a guy who fell into this position later in life, and he's like, all right, what can I do with this? And again, there are parts of what he did, environmentalism, things like that, where, yeah, he was good. But on issues he's getting credit for, no, he wasn't better for LGBTQ people. He's not great for women, things like that. As someone is saying in the comments, the bar is low, and he barely cleared it. Even in LGBT subreddits, there's been this whitewashing of how progressive Francis was. I felt like I was going nuts. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing too. It's the whitewashing of what he did. No one is mentioning the things he did not do. No one is mentioning the fine print that came with the things he got headlines for. It is so annoying. I heard an obit where they called him the People's Pope. Don't they say that about every Pope? I feel like they did not say that about Pope Benedict. John Paul II, sure. Pope Benedict was just, we're kind of all glad he's gone because he wasn't fun. And that's it. I'm sure that following Pope Sidious V helped get him a bit of a pass. That's it. In hindsight, compared to the alternative, the guy who looks good on paper, they say this about Republicans all the time. Every time you hear the words like moderate Republican, it bugs me to no end. Because again, on paper, they're all horrible. Their policies all suck. But because they're not going out there being dicks to everybody they meet, they're like, well, this one's a moderate. No, that person's also an extremist. They just know how to work in front of a camera a little better. Anyone here have favorites among the papal contenders? I've read one NBC article and kind of hope they pick Cardinal Zuppi. Honestly, right now, I don't know who the better choices would be. because one, it's very much a guessing game. I don't know where they're leaning. I don't know if they're thinking strategically to get bigger numbers. I don't know if they're trying to make the Catholic Church a more welcome club for people who may not be part of it, but they're going to have weeks to kind of discuss it privately. And we joked about this earlier, but if you've seen the movie Conclave, you are all experts at this now. So everyone's like, oh, I know how they do this. Let me tell you who they're going to pick. But I don't know who's going to be a better option. I don't necessarily know right now, like this person's going to be better than that one, because right now they all kind of just seem the same.